Good afternoon, everybody. I hope y'all are staying healthy. That it's been a pretty relaxing weekend. Yesterday was just really nice. Today seems like it's a little bit wetter, but I'm going to do a few of these while we're out. If I have to do one per unit, then that's what I'll do, so I can go through the PowerPoints with y'all, and that you've got another access and maybe have some clarifications. I'm going to try and find some different ways. Before we get started, the first thing I would say is make sure you're going ahead and that you are um, downloading and printing out review guides, that you are downloading and printing out. There's a worksheet I put out for you on types of agriculture and MDCs and LDCs, and that you're looking at the pacing guide, that you're following these things to kind of stay on top of your work. Because, like we said, the AP exam's not going anywhere. So we just need to make sure we stay on top of stuff. And I'm going to try and find some different platforms to be able to get and disseminate some information to y'all. But let's go ahead and begin for today. Um, the biggest thing that we need to look at, and this is chapter 9, focusing on agriculture, key issue 1, why do people consume different foods, is where the chapter starts. And even talks about food variety around the world. And there's 3 reasons for this. If you can kind of follow my cursor here, we've got level of development, physical conditions, and cultural preferences. Development level is pretty simple. We know that as people living in MDCs, we have a wide array of options for us as far as what to eat. People in more developed countries have more disposable income, more discretionary income. And so as a result of that, we have access to more foods, different types of foods. We have more time on our hands to go out to eat. And so it leads to a lot of variety of foods that we may or may not consume. LDCs don't really have that. A lot of times, this idea of what you grow is what you eat tends to be more available in LDCs, and they have less discretionary income, which means they're going to have less variety in choices of what to eat. And so we kind of see this idea of the haves and the have-nots immediately play itself out. The second thing, and I think this is the biggest one that we have to keep in mind right here, and if you're taking notes or if you're writing anything down, this is a big one. You have to understand the relationship between climate and agriculture. It says physical condition, but what it's talking about, it says is climate dictates what can most easily be grown. The entire semester we've talked about this concept of environmental determinism, that the environment determines what you can and cannot do. And this is most evident probably in agriculture, that when you go through, and I can't remember the exact page number, and I don't have the book right here in front of me right now, but there's a map that shows you specifically where things are grown, what types of agriculture are practiced there. And I want y'all to go and look at the comparison between what's grown and the climate. And they're going to line up. Equatorial zones typically tend to be shifting cultivation. Areas that are dry are going to be either pastoral nomadism, or it could even be livestock ranching. And when you look at like the U.S., for instance, we look at the Great Plains and it's grain farming. The biggest reason for that is because they get the perfect amount of water for grain farming, and they have this cooler climate in those areas, which is most conducive to growing grains. And we're the most productive on the planet at doing that. Same thing in South Asia. They get tons and tons and tons of water, and even Southeast Asia as well. And that's going to be very conducive to growing rice. Mediterranean climates are a great example. Areas around the Mediterranean, when I talk about Italian cuisine or Greek cuisine, we start thinking about pasta, which comes from wheat, or grapes and olives and all these different types of Mediterranean foods. But it's because that's what was easily grown there. And so there's always this direct relationship between climate and food. The last thing is it says is the cultural preferences, which just means it's what people like. We have a cultural preference for things that we like, and over the course of time, we develop these different food palettes, and they talked about that in Unit 3 as well, with kind of this relationship between people and food. Total consumption of food is essentially talking about caloric intake. This is something that we're pretty well versed in. The FAO, which is a subsidiary of the UN, recommends that you get, and I think this is a metric, but about 2,000 calories a day. The world average is above that, which is a good thing. You see your developing regions still are above that, but then we see Africa, which gets on average 2,400 calories or kcalories a day. The thing is, that is an average. So there's a lot of people who are under that as well, which leads to malnourishment. If you compare that to, we see the United States right here at 3,800, that leads to high rates of obesity in the U.S., which is obviously what our society is. We have more food at our disposal. I tell y'all a lot, like I don't eat really well, um, but it's because one, I'm just weak. I do enjoy a good hot dog or anything else that goes along with it, but we don't really have an excuse. We just have so much food at our disposal. It's a matter of convenience. You're riding down the road, and what do you're hungry, you don't want to go home and make a meal, so boom, you go pick up some fast food. And that's kind of what our society has come to, just because we are in such a high level of development. Agricultural challenges, we see three: food security, undernourishment, and food prices. Food security, physical, social, and economic access at all times to safe and nutritious food. This was a stat I found interesting, that only around 10% of the world's inhabitants don't have access to this type of food. There's a term out there that I want y'all to go look at, which is called a food desert. Food deserts are areas, and we have a lot of these in our own country, where people have zero access, not to food, but to healthy food. And we see these in mainly impoverished communities around the United States. We even have them here in Cobb County, where there is no access to healthy food, and a lot of it goes back to how much money do people make. Um, if all you have available to you is fast food restaurants, if you got Pizza Huts or anything else, and that's what you're eating a lot of, that's going to have a huge detriment to your health. And so that's why we also see high rates of diabetes in low income areas. It's because when that's the kind of food that you can afford, that's what's going to be what you eat, because that's the most indicative, I guess you would say, effect. It's how much money do I have? What can I afford? And this is what I'm going to eat as a result of it. And that has obviously a huge consequence that goes along with it, with the deterioration of our health. And like I said, diabetes is huge in low-income communities in the United States as a result of that. Undernourishment. Once again, we see Africa and South Asia pop up here, that a quarter of the population of sub-Saharan Africa is undernourished, and 1/5 of the population of South Asia, which has over 1 billion people. So when you put these together, that's 803 million people who are malnourished worldwide. And that sounds like a huge number, and it is. That's bigger than the population of the US, but globally that goes back to, that's about 10% of the world's population. The last thing we see here is food prices. Laws of supply and demand. Greatest challenge to food security is, can you afford it or can you not? The biggest thing, and we see all these related together: weather patterns drive supply, which drives demand, which drives productivity. So if you're not getting enough rain, if you're getting too much rain, that's going to dictate, how much food you're able to produce, the supply, which then leads to how much is the demand, which leads to the price of food. The other thing that goes into this is that a lot of the food that we create, specifically corn, is used a lot as biofuels for ethanol. We do a lot of that here in the U.S. and the places around the globe. And so that means that that's food that's being produced. It's not being produced to be consumed. Instead, it's being produced to make different types of fuels and alternative energy sources and things of that nature. And so we'll stop there for today. Pretty quick intro. And I'll pick back up in a couple of days. I'll put another one of these out for you guys to view. Like I said, I'm working on some platforms to get to y'all, so you can ask me questions directly or send me questions directly, and we can answer those in an efficient manner. But stay on top of your stuff. I know this is not your only class, so make sure that you are putting enough time forward to get stuff from my class, but also all your other classes completed as well. So have a great rest of your afternoon or evening or whenever you're viewing this, and I'll talk to you next time.